I lost my dad to an illness when I was 10 years old. From then on, my mom single-handedly ran the restaurant which my parents used to manage, and supported me all the way through college. Thanks to her hard work, bubbly personality, and top-notch home-cooked meals, the restaurant thrived. Despite being a single-parent family, I was able to grow up in a very privileged environment. I think it helped me grow up to be a generous and positive person. I have many friends, and I was blessed with good interpersonal relationships and led fulfilling days even after graduating college and joining a major beer company. Except, that is, for my relationship with one of my boss, Mr. Smith, who worked in the same department. Mr. Smith, 3 years older, was highly competent at his work and trusted by our superiors. Initially, he was strict but gave me precise guidance. However, recently his attitude towards me has been so harsh that I've begun to think he dislikes me personally. My friend and colleague, Williams, told me not to worry about it, but it did bother me because not being used to being disliked by people, I wanted to somehow mend our relationship, but I had no idea how to deal with it because I didn't know the cause. After a while, a major company-wide project was launched. A new team was announced from our department, consisting of Mr. Smith, Williams, and myself. Mr. Smith is the team leader. We, both Williams and I, who were in our third year with the company, were delighted that it was a great opportunity, although the fact that Mr. Smith was the leader was a concern for me.
Don't worry, Mr. Smith is strict, but he's good at his work and not unreasonable. Now that we're on the same team, we'll be working together more often, so this could be a chance for you to get along better. Think of it as a chance to show him what you're made of.
Reassured by Williams's bright words, I nodded in agreement. I didn't know what had made me fall out of favor with him, but the more time we spent together, the more opportunities we would have to understand each other. With that in mind, I resolved to do my best at work. However, Mr. Smith's attitudes remained unchanged. As Williams had said, he never got angry or ignored me for unreasonable reasons, but more often than not, he would not listen to me when I spoke up in meetings. Of course, I knew I was inexperienced, but it was tough to be constantly denied without receiving any precise instructions or advice. Everyone was working late every day and exhausted, but Mr. Smith was particularly hard-working. It might be natural as he was the leader, but he tried to do everything by himself. He didn't rely on others, or rather, he didn't seem to trust them. He worked overtime more than anyone else, and it was a given for him to work on his days off. I was a little worried about him, who was growing more and more fatigued by the day. One day, I had a long meeting with a client and returned to the office quite late to find Mr. Smith working overtime alone. If you don't mind, I can help you a bit with that. I pointed to a pile of documents on his desk. It was already past 10 p.m. Everyone else had gone home long ago, and only Mr. Smith was left in the room. Even when I offered to help, he just said without taking his eyes off his computer, "I'm fine. You can go home." But, haven't you been working overtime every day recently, Mr. Smith? You don't look well either. You should go home early and rest sometimes. I just need to input these, right? As I reached out for the documents, he suddenly shouted, "I told you I'm fine. Don't touch them."
Just do what you're supposed to do. Stop trying to please everyone.
Caught off guard by his harsh words, I felt more anger than surprise. I don't like conflicts, but this time I couldn't help but retort. Why do I have to be spoken to like this? All I said was that I'd help, right? I could feel my blood boiling, but I couldn't hold back. Maybe I was letting out some pent-up frustration.
That's exactly what's annoying. I can't stand how you're always trying to play the good guy. Just go home already.
With that, Mr. Smith didn't even look at me. For a moment, I thought about punching him, but decided against it. It was ridiculous. I was disgusted with myself for wanting to get along with such a person. I grabbed my bag without a word and quickly left the room. My apartment is only a 10-minute bike ride from the office, but I didn't want to go back to an empty room, so I got on the train. I felt like I needed a drink. After about 20 minutes on the train, I walked into my mom's restaurant, which I hadn't visited in a while.
Well, this is a surprise.
Saying that, she smiled at me from behind the counter. There was only one male customer at the end of the bar.
I haven't seen you around lately. I was wondering how you were doing. Been busy with work?
She placed a cold bottle of beer in front of me. Ever since I started working and living alone, I would drop by here twice a week for dinner, but I've been too busy to visit lately. Yay, kind of busy. I said softly, poured the beer into the glass and gulped it down in one go. As I sighed, I continued to pour the beer.
What's the matter? Drowning your sorrows?
She is as sharp as ever. She placed appetizers in front of me and began frying something. Appetizers are homemade pickles and cheese platters. The homemade pickles, which I hadn't had in a long time, eased my tense emotions. Maybe I had let my guard down, but I suddenly started to feel drunk. My colleague's been picking on me for no reason. Power harassment. I accidentally started to grumble. I got up, went behind the counter, grabbed a bottle of beer, and returned to my seat.
Don't you think you might have said something unnecessary without realizing it? You do have a knack for lacking tact, Jake.
You could call it being open-hearted. As I said that, she chuckled, ha ha ha, and placed Caesar salad and French fries on the counter. The fragrant aroma tickled my nostrils, and I started eating. While eating, I told her about my relationship with Mr. Smith and what had happened that night. She just quietly listened to me. After I had finished talking, she served me a cup of coffee.
I see. In other words, you're not liked, is that it?
Well, yes, I don't know why, but it's affecting my work, and I want him to stop. It's like being bullied as a kid.
There might not be a reason. Maybe he just dislikes your face.
Just when I thought, what? The man sitting at the counter chuckled.
Sorry for interrupting. You really are funny.
The man who had turned to look at us was around 60 years old. Dressed in a high-quality suit, his gentle smile emanated an aura of dignity.
Oh, I apologize for letting you hear such trivial talk.
She served the man a cup of coffee. While thinking that it wasn't trivial at all, I lightly bowed to the man.
I might be sticking my nose in where it doesn't belong, but may I say something?
I nodded. Yeah?
That colleague, he might not hate you, but he might get a thing for you. You know how little boys pull the hair of the girls they like, right? That's what it feels like. I just couldn't help but think that.
I said again, yeah? He gets a thing for me. What's that about? Not that he could hear my inner voice, but the man laughed heartily and said, of course, I mean as a person. Like he can't stop thinking about you. It might be good to have an honest talk. You might get an unexpected answer. With that, the man stood up saying, check, please, and left the place with a smile, saying, sorry for saying unnecessary things. I'll come again. He was a mysterious man. Just having exchanged a few words with him, his words had settled in my heart. When I asked my mom who he was, she said she didn't know because he was just someone who occasionally came in just before closing time and they hadn't really talked about much. Sometime after that, it was decided that our team would entertain clients. Although the clients were all young and we were looking for a place where we could let loose and eat and drink to our heart's content, Mr. Smith asked, does anyone know a good place? I hesitated a bit, but then boldly suggested, how about my mother's restaurant? My mother runs a restaurant. It's a small place with a counter as the main area, but I guarantee the taste of the food. We can rent out the whole place, so you can make as much noise as you want, and it will be a lot cheaper." After saying this, Mr. Smith looked at me and said, "Oh."
Can we count on you then?
With that said, he gave me a grin. Seeing his smile made me happy, and I found myself responding like an elementary school kid, "Yes." I immediately called my mom and informed her of the date and the number of guests. When I mentioned that Mr. Smith would also be coming, she exclaimed in excitement, "Really?"
Well, then I'll do my best to make up for my son's incompetence.
"I'm not that incompetent." With that, I ended the call. The sound of her delighted voice lingered in my ear. Back when I was a student, I would often take my friends to her restaurant, but since becoming a working adult, I hadn't taken anyone. I wonder if this counts as being a dutiful son. The thought made me happy. Fast forward to the day of the banquet, a week later. Around noon, I was summoned by Mr. Smith.
The department head from the other party will be joining us tonight. I'm sorry, but we'll have to cancel at your mother's place.
With that casual remark, I was thrown into a state of panic. We were preparing for a party of almost 20 people. My mom would have been busy preparing since the morning. "Cancel, you said?"
With the department head joining us, we can't be seen at a grungy small restaurant, can we? I'll book a fancier place. Sorry for the trouble.
With that, Mr. Smith returned to his work. His description of the place as grungy stung. Was he saying that my mother's restaurant was grungy? How condescending. I wanted to complain, but I took out my smartphone to make the cancellation call to my mom. After explaining the situation, my mom brightly said, "Well, that's life." However, her voice betrayed her disappointment. I apologized profusely before hanging up the call. Recalling Mr. Smith's attitude made me clench my smartphone tightly. I was frustrated. I couldn't forgive him for hurting not me, but my mom. Not wanting to see Mr. Smith's face, I decided to head out. As I was visiting a few clients, my phone rang. It was my mom.
Do you remember the customer who was sitting at the counter when you came last time? His name is Mr. Bob, and he called. He wants to book the place for tonight. It's a bit sudden, but at least the preparations won't go to waste. I thought you might be worried, so I'm reporting it to you.
Hearing her cheerful voice, I felt relieved. That's good. Once I finish my work, I'll come over to help.
What? But don't you have a business dinner tonight?
I'm not going to that. I ended the call. I had no intention of attending tonight's business dinner. Even if I were to be called childish, I didn't care. Just for today, I didn't want to listen to what Mr. Smith had to say. Knowing that the reservation was for 7 p.m., I arrived at the restaurant 30 minutes earlier, put on an apron like the one my dad used to wear, and started helping out. I was used to helping my mom during busy times since I was a kid. As I was arranging appetizers, time flew by, and before I knew it, the sound of the sliding door opening echoed through the restaurant.
Welcome.
As my mom loudly greeted, "Good evening," Mr. Bob walked in.
Sorry for the sudden request. My client said he wanted to treat us, so I thought I'd love to have your home-cooked meals. I brought some young folks with me, so please feed us till they're full.
Following him, the guests started to come in one after the other, and among them, to my surprise, was Mr. Smith. I was so surprised that I let out a no. Without thinking, Mr. Smith was looking at me, his eyes wide with surprise.
What? Is that you, Jake? Why are you here? Weren't you supposed to be helping out at your mom's restaurant today?
It was Williams who spoke up. The rest of the crew looked at me, surprised to see me in an apron.
Wait, your mom's place is this place. But I thought you said you canceled the reservations.
He looked over at Mr. Smith after saying that. An awkward silence filled the room for a moment.
Well, everyone, please have a seat. How about you start with a beer? Jake, don't just stand there, get the beer.
She, sensing something, cheerfully stepped behind the counter after saying this. Mr. Bob took a brief glance at me, didn't say anything, and took his seat. Mr. Smith also sat next to him. Dishes piled high on large plates kept coming out, and the beer kept flowing. After about an hour of work, my mom said, "You're done now. Go have a drink." I took off my apron and was about to join Williams and the others at their table when Mr. Smith stopped me as I came out from behind the counter. He handed me a bottle of beer, urging me to drink. Without a word, I sat down next to him and poured the beer into my glass.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Smith bowed his head to me, nearly making me spit out my beer. If it's about the reservation cancellation, don't worry about it. I was shocked to find out that Mr. Bob is the head client, but well, all's well that ends well. Even though there was still some lingering awkwardness, he bowed his head so deeply that I thought it was fine in the end. I'm not one to hold a grudge. Seeing me like this, Mr. Smith gave a small laugh and said, "That's the part of you I struggled with."
I'm sorry not just for the cancellation, but also for my attitude towards you. I was jealous of you, and it's embarrassing to admit.
He took a swig of his beer. Jealous? I didn't understand what he was talking about, so I kept quiet and waited for him to continue.
You're really straightforward, Jake. You're not the type to hold on to negative feelings for a long time. That's too bright for someone like me. When I look at you, it reminds me of how small and petty I am.
Even after all that, I still didn't understand what he was talking about. My confusion must have shown on my face, because he looked at me and laughed.
Sorry, it's probably hard for you to understand. In short, I was jealous of you. I grew up in a single-parent household too, and my mom ran a small diner to support me. I was bullied a lot as a kid because of it, and when I grew up, I thought I was going to make everyone who bullied me pay. I didn't make any friends and I fought my way to where I am now. When I saw your background, I felt a strange kinship because we had similar experiences. But unlike me, you had no twisted pots. It surprised me, even though we were raised in similar environments. How could you be so ridiculously straight-laced?
Even though he called me ridiculous, I didn't get angry. I refilled his glass, then my own.
You're uncomplicated, not twisted or seeing others as enemies like me. It oddly annoyed me. How could you live so straight, even though you were raised in the same kind of environment as me? I wanted to live like you. You were like an ideal vision. You were the person I wanted to be but couldn't. I was taking out my frustrations on you. I was too hard on you, more than necessary. As a leader and as a person, I was terrible. I'm sorry.
He bowed his head deeply once again. Not knowing what to say, I just stared blankly. Then Mr. Bob came over with a glass in his hand and sat down next to Mr. Smith.
So you were the first to reserve this place. Then you canceled, and unknowingly I rebooked it. Things have a way of falling into place in the end, don't they?
He said this with a gentle smile. My mom was behind the counter, smiling at Mr. Smith and me.
I'm truly sorry for just canceling the reservation so casually.
Mr. Smith apologized to my mom. She, shaking her head with a smile, said he's still a bit immature, but I hope you can continue to get along. Please come for dinner again. We'll always be waiting for you. And she bowed her head.
It's a wonderful thing, being human. Because we have words, we can easily convey our thoughts. It's a waste to hold back. Say what you think. It'll make you feel much better.
He patted Mr. Smith's shoulder a couple of times as he said this. Mr. Smith gave a shy nod, then clinked his glass against mine, saying, "I'm counting on you." After that, Mr. Smith remained as tough as ever. But I wasn't about to lose either. Whenever he voiced his opinions, I shot back with my own. Whether it was thanks to that or not, our team, Mr. Smith and I started to produce better results, and we were paired up more and more often because of it,
That's why I say you're being too soft.
he said, slamming his glass down on the counter. It's not being soft, it's compromising. Chasing only immediate gains is your bad habit, isn't it? I've told you that many times.
What did you say?
As we glared at each other, we could hear my mom's hearty laughter in the background.
You two bicker like brothers.
Feeling embarrassed, we both turned away. Since that day, Mr. Smith and I had been drinking together at my mom's restaurant. We were always arguing, but somehow we had become friends.
Ah, still at it, I see.
The man who slid open the door was Mr. Bob. He had become a regular at this restaurant and would naturally take a seat next to us whenever Mr. Smith and I were there.
Welcome, Mr. Bob. You're like the dignified father to my mischievous sons.
My mom said that, and Mr. Bob laughed.